Today's video is a little bit different. We had a fantastic session in our journal club on Patreon, and for this time only, I want to give you that session for free because there was so much value that came out of this session. I felt obliged to share it with you. So if you don't know what Journal Club is, basically we meet monthly for our Zoom call and read scientific papers and go back and forth sharing ideas, and I teach people basically how to read scientific papers so they can use that skill to go forward and develop themselves as a keeper that can understand science. Apart from just that teaching aspect, it's a social thing as well, and we all really enjoy it. So watch today's episode, you'll get an idea of what Journal Club is. It's a raw recording, I've not edited it at all, and if you end up liking this and you think, oh, I would love to have been a part of that conversation, you can join Patreon down below and join Journal Club and be there next month. I'll talk to you at the end. So this is Natural Behaviour is Not Enough. Farm Animal Welfare Needs Modern Answers to Tim Bergen's 4 Questions. This paper changed my view of animal welfare forever. This came out in 2023. I've read this before, but this is such a pivotal paper for me in my own personal thoughts around animal welfare that it's like a really important one to cover, and I've touched upon it in the course episodes and stuff, but this is the raw paper that I think is brilliant. So I will skip the summary and we'll go straight into the intro. Just take a drink real quick. No doubt my mouth's going to dry out. So in 1963, Nico Tinbergen put forward a framework on how to study the behavior of animals. This framework is often referred to as the 4 whys, or the 4 questions, because Tinbergen, while emphasizing the complexity and diversity of animal behavior, also argued that there were 4 questions that could always be asked about any behavior: how it developed, ontogeny; how it helps an animal survive and reproduce, adaptation; and how it has changed over evolutionary time, phylogeny; and about the neural, hormonal, and other mechanisms underlying the behavior, causation. These 4 questions have been immensely influential in the development of scientific approach to animal welfare, and have stood the test of time precisely because they are both specific enough to be clear that different answers are required to the different questions, and general enough to accommodate the many advances in genetics, neuroscience, behavioral ecology, animal welfare science, and evolutionary biology that have occurred since 1963. So what she's doing, she's going to make her point and then link it back to Nico Tinbergen's 4 whys. However, there is one application of animal behavior where the progress that has been made since Tinbergen's first posed the 4 questions has been largely overlooked, or perhaps just not updated. This is the widespread reliance on natural behavior as a way of assessing animal welfare. I love this paper so much. Natural behavior is commonly defined as behavior shown by animals living where their ancestors evolved, or at least in man-made environments that allow them to express similar freedom of movement. The welfare of more confined members of the same species, such as those living in zoos, farms, or in people's homes, is then judged by the extent in which they too, are able to show this natural behavior. Despite the many scientific criticisms that have been leveled at the idea of linking natural behavior to animal welfare, and a whole bucket load of citations, I would love to go through that and read that at some point. Natural behavior is now widely used as a welfare metric outside science, particularly by people in the food industry responsible for company animal welfare politics. Right. The ability to perform natural behavior is made explicit in the sustainability and ethical goals of many food producers, food retailers, and outlets across the world. For example, a major international food outlet given as one of its animal welfare priorities that providing enrichment that supports natural behavior. And in applying this specifically to chicken states, we're working with chain partners to ensure housing environments that promote natural behavior such as pecking, perching, and dust bathing. So this paper is mainly about farm animals, but it is wholly applicable to what we do and zoo animals. This paper changed my whole world. Given the widespread use of natural behavior as a welfare metric by the food industry and others, there is clearly a need to explain to those with the power and money to make changes to the way farm animals are managed exactly why over-reliance on natural behavior may not improve welfare in practice as much as they hope. And there is a much more effective evidence-based ways of improving the lives of farm animals, or in our case, our exotic animals, or our reptiles. The aim of this paper is therefore to show how animal welfare on commercial farms could be improved by relying less on uncritical use of natural behavior as a welfare metric and by giving more weight to evidence of what the animals themselves actually value. By asking Tinbergen's four classic behavioral questions, by answering them in the light of more recent knowledge of animal behavior, it becomes clear as to why we need to look beyond natural behavior towards a more animal-centric way of assessing welfare. Just gonna take another drink, 1 second. So it's natural behavior and welfare. Natural behavior began to feature prominently in public discussions of farm animal welfare following the publication in 1979 of the Five Freedoms, five simple statements about what is necessary for good animal welfare. The first three of the five freedoms address the conditions needed for physical health: freedom from hunger, freedom from physical discomfort, and freedom from injury and disease, while the last two refer to mental health, freedom from stress, significantly the freedom to perform most normal patterns of behavior. Normal rather than natural was used to allow for the fact that domestic farm animals may behave differently from their wild ancestors, but still have the same need for freedom of movement. W. H. Thorpe expressed a more common ethological view at the time in this way. A very large part of animal behavior is basically determined by instinctive or innate abilities, proclivities, and dispositions. Suppression of these instinctive appetites can give rise to evidence of prolonged and intense emotional disturbance, which, whether or not they are painful to the animal, are most distressing to see. Referring specifically to farm animals such as chickens and pigs, Thorpe went on, while accepting the need for much restriction, we must draw the line at conditions which completely suppress all or nearly all of the natural instinctive urges and behavior patterns characteristic of actions appropriate to the highest degree of social organization found in the ancestral wild species, and which have been little, if at all, bred out in the process of domestication. They used a lot of unnecessary words back in those days, didn't they? Thorpe thus brought together the idea of animals having an innate instinctive urges or needs to perform various natural behavior patterns put forward by Conrad Lorenz. While the idea of these urges was suppressed, this resulted in emotional disturbance. He then went further and concluded that what is required to examine the incidence of those expressive movements, which are known to be associated with damaging situations, in concluded in order to assess whether animals are brought up with a certain degree of deprivation, suffer from deprived states in adulthood. By using the word suffer, Thorpe broke the prevailing scientific taboo on discussing what animals might consciously feel and made the connection between natural behavior, instinct, and animal welfare that has persisted to this day. Isn't it mad that even the taboo of suffer, you couldn't say that? And I feel the same way about the word happy. If you say an animal can be happy, it would be scientifically taboo to say that. But then when we look at animal welfare science, we talk about positive affective states and positive emotions or positive feelings, right? But what is happiness? I would characterize happiness as an overwhelming sense of positive emotions, right? Would anyone disagree with that?
I think happiness is more difficult than suffer. I think
Yeah, for sure.
further down in the text they have again a definition of suffering. I think further down in the text there's another one where they say that something negative is persisting and recurring. And happiness, I don't know, I think likewise for happiness, you could see that at some point, whatever is causing happiness is becoming regular event, and then the happiness is decreasing.
Yeah, I mean, like, because the taboo side of it is saying happiness and like, oh, I don't like that word, and to say whether they wouldn't like the word suffer back then, but the way that we describe is to have like a positive affective state, which is like an overwhelming sense of positive emotions, or if you're in a positive affective state, the majority of the time, you would have the majority of your time you would be experiencing positive affective states. That is scientific, and that is like the five needs nowadays. So that's entirely scientific. But if I were to say happy, that would be like, ooh, but I would say happy is just another short form way of saying an overwhelming sense of positive emotions. But they would say that was like you couldn't say that even though it's exactly what we're describing, right? Sometimes it's okay to call a spade, but scientifically it's still a bit taboo, even though it really shouldn't be, in my opinion. Being able to perform natural behavior has also become, for some, what good welfare means. That is so true. So many people think that if it's something they consider natural, that it means it's what good welfare even is, which is totally not. An expression of an animal's essence or telos and the way it evolved to be in its natural environment. This view is also reflected in survey of public opinion, which consistently sees animal behavior as an essential part of animal welfare. Natural behavior can thus easily appear to be the ideal welfare metric. It's based on the animal's own behavior. It can be measured and even quantified, and above all, has a public opinion on its side. All this makes it easy for the food industry to use emotive impact of the word natural in their promotion of their products and overlook the very real problems that exist with linking natural behavior to welfare. Though substantial, these are so substantial that natural behavior, if taken on its own, may not improve welfare at all. To see why, we can use Tim Bergen's four questions. This is a very interesting paper because there's a lot that still says natural behavior, and this is going against the grain. And personally, we'll get to the end of it and discuss it, but I really agree with this paper. So Tim Bergen's proximate questions, development and causation. Feel free to ask anything, by the way, Melanie, rather than you don't have to like not speak or anything. The idea articulated by Thorpe that most animal behavior is driven by instinctive urges has now been largely discarded. It was based on a once influential model of animal behavior put forward by Konrad Lorenz, where he argued that animals had motivational energy or drive associated with each of their behaviors, which built up inside them the longer they had gone without doing that behavior. When the behavior was actually performed, the motivational energy would be discharged and the animal would no longer want to do the behavior. If the animal was prevented from showing the behavior, the level of motivational energy would rise up and dam up until eventually it would spill over and result in inappropriate and damaging behavior. Damming up was then used as evidence by Lorraine and others that animals had behavioral needs that had to be met to ensure good welfare. The time course of some behaviors does indeed suggest that something might be accumulating inside a deprived animal, resulting in a greatly increased tendency to perform that behavior when the opportunity eventually arrives or arises. This rebound effect is shown by people who make it up for lost sleep by sleeping in more when eventually able to rest, by chickens that make up for deprivation of dust bathing, and cows that make up for deprivation of lying by doing more than when they can. I think we've seen a lot of that as well. Like if you deprive, say, something of, for example, when see snakes that are deprived of UVB, when I get them for the first time, when I give them UVB for that first day, they spend hours, that whole afternoon under that UV lamp, just topping up. They must feel so low on vitamin D or whatever, like hormones, these like positive hormones, these dopamine, the endorphins that come in the skin from being under it. They will sit there that whole afternoon, and then their use of it will be much more uh typical or measured rather than like I have to use this all day because it's new and I need it. So that definitely happens. I've seen that in instances with that as well.
It
Where
could
was that?
also be that they haven't experienced it, so they don't know if this is a one-off shot, that they might as well soak it up all now while they can, while it's still there before it disappears tomorrow, because they don't have any concept of will it be there tomorrow.
Yeah, it's not part of their routine and it's not expected, so it's a scarcity as well. That's very true. That's a really good point, actually. Scarcity in itself, in that instance, might actually be a driving factor too. Um, and it also might drive a lot of the behaviors talking about in like the dusting and the lying for cows. What line did I get up to? Okay, even 60 years ago, however, Lorenzas model, with its implication of damming up of instinctive urges, has been heavily criticized, quite apart from its resilience on unspecified motivational energy. It simply failed to express much real behavior, leading most scientists to disregard it. However, its influence lived on. Even as the model itself was consigned to history and not explaining the behavior of most real animals, the idea that it gave rise to that animals have instinctive motivational drives to perform all of their natural behavior survived and is still influencing the way many people see animal behavior to this day. Lorenz also argued that each species had its own repertoire of instinctive behaviors consisting of relatively fixed units of patterns of behavior, such as pecking or scratching, which he calls fixed action patterns. He saw these fixed action patterns as the basic building blocks of behavior. Excuse me, performing more or less in the same way each time, and then linked together to form sequences of characteristics of a given species. Some behavior does indeed seem to be a fixed, instinctive element, such as nest building and cells, which can be passed without learning from generation to generation. But most behavior is also flexible and changes according to the experiences of the individual. Behavior is controlled by a variety of different mechanisms that develop with different mixtures of genetics, environment, and social influences. It is thus no longer possible to treat natural behavior as a single category, with all behavior having the same worth of consequences if it is prevented or not performed. Oh, that's into sentence, sorry. Each animal needs a separate understanding of its causation, development, each behavior, sorry, and what happens if an animal is unable to perform it. The strength of the link to welfare will also vary. Natural behavior can even be a sign of poor welfare. Behaviors such as being caught by a predator are entirely natural in the sense that they occur in nature, but they do not necessarily improve welfare as judged by either physical health or what the animals themselves want. Natural behavior, such as hiding from a predator, scratching, or constantly searching for food, occur not when the animal's welfare is good, but when it is poor, such as being in a state of continuous fear, physical discomfort, or the deficit of a vital nutrient. Indeed, much natural behavior of wild animals can be seen as an attempt to ward off the constant threats of death by predation, disease, malnutrition, attacks by other animals, parasites, and adverse weather that wild animals face much of their lives. Natural behavior taken on its own is thus a very unreliable indicator of the welfare state of the animal. Without additional evidence of what happens if a particular behavior does not occur, it is impossible to establish a convincing link to welfare, because natural behavior on its own lacks the most essential indication of welfare, whether performance or non-performance of a behavior actually matters to the animal. A major advance in the study of behavior over the last 60 years has been the development of finding out ways of what does matter to animals. It is now entirely possible to effectively ask animals what they want, and Tinbergen's questions about development and causation can now include answers about the effects of performing or not performing natural behaviors. It is this previously missing information about what matters to the animals themselves that now needs to be added to the uncritical use of natural behavior as a welfare metric. We're getting into the weeds now. I love this. Not chapter, but four, what animals value. As Lorenz and Thorpe both recognized, the ability to make animals much more flexible than if they had to solely rely on a fixed set of instinctive patterns. the ability to learn. Sorry, I skipped a word there. For example, an animal may eat foods that come in a variety of shapes and sizes, are found in a variety of different places, and require a variety of techniques to obtain the nutritional content from them. By having an innate liking for, say, sweet taste, and combining this with the ability to learn many new behaviors to obtain that sweet taste, the animal can achieve far more flexibility and adaptability to an changing, unpredictable world than if its feeding behavior involved doing the same natural behavior over and over and over again. It could exploit new foods never encountered by its ancestors and quickly learn to take advantage of new ways of attaining nutrition, even though these might be quite unnatural and never seen by any wild ancestor. That is such a good point. You could look at a variety of different things, different species. They could be invasive in a new environment. And they have to eat whole new different food groups. And even though they might have a nutritional requirement of that item, they would have to learn and be adaptable in how to obtain that nutrition. If it was fixed and innate, they wouldn't be able to adapt to new environments or a changing environment. I'm just going to drink before I do the next line. My voice is going already. Far from being fixed and instinctive, most animal behavior is a subtle and constructive interplay between genes and environment. Genes specify what an animal finds rewarding, such as a sweet taste, or punishing, such as pain, and so to guide it towards what is beneficial and away from what is harmful. But the genes do not usually specify exactly what behavior has to be done. They've missed a space there. Done to.
Yeah, I
Done.
also stumbled about that word. I first thought it's an English word. I don't know. What is done
No,
to?
it's just done to. They've missed a, they've missed a space. Boo! Editors failed. Achieve these ends. But that's so true. So if the genes specify what they might find motivating or something that they find valuable, or the reverse punishing, but the gene doesn't specify how that goal has to be achieved, only that it values that goal. The animal has to learn from its own experience how to reach rewards and avoid punishments. By discovering what those rewards and punishments are and how hard animals will work to obtain or avoid them, we have an objective way of knowing what they value. Rewards and punishments are at the heart of current theories of both human and animal emotion. Indeed, emotions are defined as states elicited by the presentation, termination, or omission of rewards and punishes. Thus, a positive emotion of pleasure might be elicited by receiving a reward, such as food when hungry, social approval, or warmth when cold, while a negative emotion such as fear might be elicited by an impending punishment, such as a rapidly approaching predator. Some emotions, such as frustration, are elicited by not receiving an expected reward or by having it taken away, while yet others, such as relief, come from an expected punishment is removed or avoided. This way of classifying emotions by whether they are positive or negative, sometimes called the valiance or valence. I think no, it's valence. It's not valence. That would be an I. Is readily applicable to animal welfare, since good animal welfare can be seen as animals having predominantly positive emotions. Adding a second dimension of arousal or strength of emotion makes the approach even more relevant, since a distinction then can be made between the mild or transitory negative emotions, such as a mild itch that is on the minor concern, and those that are both negative and strongly aroused, and so deserve the label suffering. The idea of what the animals value as judged by the reward they are willing to work to obtain and the punishes they will work to avoid is now well established as an important part of animal-centered approach to animal welfare. And it has changed how the link between natural behavior and welfare is now perceived. What animals have been evolved to do is not so much perform a behavior, but to be rewarded or punished by circumstances that are usually a result of such behavior. The means that we do not This means that we do not, I am tired. This means that we should not be assessing welfare just by whether the animals are showing natural behavior, but whether they have what they value, as shown by what they're willing to work for. Not all natural behavior turns out to be have the same value to an animal. To show an animal values something means that they will work for reward. That is, it will learn to perform some arbitrary action to obtain it. For example, laying hens will peck a key to gain access to straw, and pigs, calves, and shorn sheep will learn to operate switches for the reward of heat. Heifers can learn to operate a panel with their noses, give themselves 15 minutes of being able to lie down, and calves push a panel with their head for the reward of a few minutes of social contact with another familiar calf. Now, there are reptile versions of this. There was a paper in the pre-2000s, I don't remember the dates, where they trained king snakes to turn a turnkey to access water. And they trained Burmese pythons to press an illuminated button to access food. So even in reptiles, there are examples in the literature of animals being asked to work for things that they deem as valuable. Making animals work for their rewards, however, is often impractical as it involves equipment that is not available on farms. Even more seriously, it may be logistically difficult with some rewards to present them repeatedly. With food as the reward, small amounts can be delivered each trial, so the animal has to repeat the response if it wants more of the reward. But with other rewards, such as lying down or dust bathing, it is much more difficult. The animal has somehow to be removed from what it has chosen the first time so it can make another response, and this means being handled, pushed away, or shotted away from what has been chosen to see whether it still wants it next time. For example, to show that young cows want to lie down enough to learn to operate a switch for the reward of lying down for 15 minutes, Jensen et al. Had to make them stand up again after 15 minutes so they could make another response. Another repetition, basically. Apart from the logistical problems involved in devising the appropriate environment and equipment, being made to stand up every 15 minutes could itself have made the opportunity to lie down less rewarding for the cow. Practical considerations thus mean that what animals value has often been measured in other ways. These include, and I'm just going to drink before we carry on, my voice is going. But instantly there, I thought about in the same way that they trained a Burmese python to press an illuminated button for food, wouldn't it be interesting if you could train the animal to press a button to turn the basking spot on and off? So where there are some sectors of reptile culture that say some species don't need or are scared of light or don't want light, it would be interesting if you could ask a snake or a corn snake to work for what they value by turning the basking spot on themselves. Because there was a talk I watched recently from an EASA presentation talking about choice and control, and a lot of the things they do for like their elephants is the elephants can pull on a rope and it will turn the shower on the overhead sprayer system, so the animals had control over accessing things that they value. We're getting into a new territory now of animal welfare where it's like more animal centered versus what we prescribe them. They can just choose it, and I think that's really
Like,
cool.
I'd like to see that with the snake because the snake is pushing somewhere to access, for example, the food source. This is like these, let's say, the colubrids opening puzzle feeders, like these dog puzzle feeders, where they just operate the handle and then there's the food below. And I would like to see that you can teach a snake to operate something that is not physically close to what it wants to obtain.
Not immediate, yeah.
Yeah, not it's not immediate. So pushing some button or lying down somewhere with pressure of weight, and then having the link of suddenly a heat source appearing.
I wonder
I'd
if
really like to see that. I don't know
I
how it
think
will happen.
there's probably a way to make it biologically relevant to an animal, right? So maybe that rather than ask them to press a button, maybe it's a pressure plate, and what if they go and sit on this pressure
Yeah,
plate, it
yeah,
turns the lights on, and then at the moment they leave, it turns off. So and if they come and turn it on again, then you know that they're choosing it. For
so the
example, when
pressure
it,
plate, yeah,
sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. I think just the pressure plate would be in a certain spot. So it would be like for the snake, like going to the certain spot because it knows in that spot I will always have a certain temperature and a certain radiation. And if there's a pressure plate below or not, does not matter because it's just associating the spot. So it's like having a heat spot, a very concentrated heat spot, like a spot lamp. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's like the operator for the
Yeah,
output has to be in a different spot.
I think the way that I would do it was I would give them a heat mat in one spot so that they have the choice of uh what. So it's not a force thing, right? It's not like
Mm.
you need this to function so that you will do this. It would be like they would have a heat mat and under a hide somewhere that is a part of a fixed point in their environment that they can use. And then you're asking them to be willing to work for like a heat lamp for that near infrared as an extra thing. So if they
Mm.
ignore the heat mat, and they go and are willing to work for something else to turn it on, then you would say that the heat lamp is much more valuable than the heat mat because the heat mat was free and they actually had to work for the other things. They went past the free resource and had to put in a shift and a work for a resource that they clearly find more valuable. Because
Right,
people,
Also,
right.
if,
also an idea for a possible reward would be something like something that adds water, like a humidity, like some kind of like spray nozzle. If they wanted to increase their humidity or if they wanted some water on them, because it's not for a lot of animals, depending, a necessity for extra if they already have a source of water and they have enough humidity, but to give them a way that they can get more if they want to without needing it.
because it's about what the animal wants, right? So this is where my brain has gone since I read this paper 2 years ago. It's been 2 years, Jesus Christ. But so many people were like, well, this species is this, so it has to be this. Let's say it's something drier, right? And they're like, oh God, no, it can't have this because it must. Oh, God, sorry, this energy drink is doing me in, but they're like, I can't have this, but actually, you could have something like an air stone and a big water bowl for a bearded dragon, and the bearded dragon might go sit in like a little jacuzzi, right? For whatever reason, the animal might value that because that individual has a proclivity to doing that. But there would be people that would be like, no, they can't have that because they're a bearded dragon. But if the animal values it and you can test it by doing it in a way that you ask the animal to work for that resource, you can objectively measure the value that is to the animal. And then we go into deeper on how to do that in this paper. But this is the whole other world of like how we can make these animals' lives like literally amazing. Because we give them control and we give them what they actually want. Where did I get? I got to here. Spatial distribution. The ways animals position themselves within their environment or in relation to each other can be particularly useful for identifying what animals want when formal tests are simply not feasible, such as investigating whether animals want more space or find high stocking densities aversive, because they do not involve disturbing the animals in any way, such as methods can be seen as very sensitive and reveal subtleties in which animals want that others more intrusive methods can miss. When they are very young, for example, broiler chickens choose to cluster together and want to breed together. But when they're older, they tend to space out themselves out and find it aversive to be too close to other birds. Um, there was also another paper that I've remembered now where they took these water snakes and they would run a guitar string under these chambers and they would pluck this guitar string because the vibrations would be like aversive to these animals. And if it was aversive, the animals would move away to a different chamber. And all of them did that, bar one water snake who actually went towards the vibrations and the guitar pluck and actually went the opposite way and probably found it rewarding for whatever reason. This weirdo, pervy water snake was sat there on the vibrations or something, or whatever reason it finds that against the grain and actually went towards that guitar pluck when every other snake found it aversive. But you could have a person that was like, actually, my water snake finds value in this, and every other keeper was like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're stressing it. It hates it. But actually, that individual water snake is just a weirdo and likes it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can do individual testing. I mean, it could be interesting because I already see differences in three different animals I have. So some of them seem to prefer different things. So maybe.
So I
Weird.
think going forward, the what makes a keeper great is not setting up each setup like it's this species and this puzzle piece fits into that block, but how well you can assess and attune to what each individual animal
Yeah.
values and craft their individual care to them and being in tune with that animal. Not these people that have these huge collections and refer to the animals as specimens, but viewing them as individuals and being attuned to their wants and what they're willing to work for. It's just on another level, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can't tell. I love this sort of thing. Time spent looking at spatial. Is that the one I just read? No, it's not. Looking at spatial distribution over time gives an even clearer idea of what animals want, particularly if they move around or make repeated choices about where they want to be. Measuring the amount of time the animals spend on or near resources such as perches, shelters, or scratching areas is a relatively easy, non-destructive way of seeing which ones they value most by where they spend most of their time. It can also help to rule out ones that they do not value. If something is claimed as enrichment and the animal takes no notice or avoids it altogether, then it can hardly be claimed that they value it. Zoos often use this method to find out whether animals find the presence of zoo visitors aversive or attractive by providing refuges where the animals can hide from visitors and then see whether the animals choose to spend time close to visitors or away from them. It is also possible to establish what physical features of their enclosure animals like or dislike by where they spend their time. In an agricultural context, both free-range broiler chickens and free-range laying hens spend a disproportionate amount of time either under or near trees if this option is available to them. And cattle choose to spend their time lying down outside, particularly at night. So this is essentially what our bull python SPI study has been. Ellie's methodology for the spatial participation index basically measures out the enclosure based on the maps of the surface of everything and then maps out the what they value by time spent in different areas and what they actually go towards. And we've got our data done now. We're just writing the paper. Then the papers, it's going to be interesting. It's very interesting results. Approach or avoidance. A somewhat more structured and controlled way of what animals value is to measure their speed of approaching or moving away from something. If this speed increases or decreases, the more the experience they have of it, this indicates whether they have found the experience rewarding or punishing. Hammer Attel trained rats to run down a corridor to a goal box, where they were allowed 5-second interaction with a training object. Once the rats were reliably running to the goal box, the training objective was removed and replaced by different potential enrichment items, such as plastic ball or cardboard tube, and the rats were given 3 more trials with each object. Over these 3 trials, rats ran at different speeds depending on what the object they were running towards wasn't the goal. They ran fastest towards objects that they had previously shown they preferred in a two-way choice test. Running speed thus gave a continuously varying indication of how much they put on interacting with different objects. So latency, in other words, I don't think you were a part of the Patreon at the time, Melanie, but Simon, do you remember when we looked at that paper for where they put those? There's like a trio of leopard geckos in a box, and then there was in an enriched environment, and they would put a novel object in, and then measure the latency that they like approached the novel
Engaged
object.
with it. They
Yeah, and
measured how long engagement was present. Yeah.
so that paper is effectively doing what this is saying, where they measured the latency of what they valued of like,
Mm.
and I think from memory, the tub animals actually approached the latency was shorter, wasn't it, to the novel object or the enrichment? And I think my criticism at the time was the distance was greater in the vivarium, so that's also a factor. But I think also the minimalistic style of the tub in the tub group meant that the novelty of the novel item increased the latency in which they approached to it. And the enriched environment, they didn't feel the necessity to interact with with that object because they had enrichment in the rest of the, like complexity in that environment at the very least.
Yeah, and the new object didn't stand out that much in the as in the barren. Yeah, I remember something. Would need to read again, but yeah, yeah.
But along these
Well,
lines,
I can't speak to the intelligence of geckos in particular, but I know pet rats are extremely intelligent. I
oh
used
yeah.
to have pet rats at one point in time, and they're dog level intelligence. Tricks, phrases, names, concepts, like they are so super smart, and people just do not even, you know.
Well, I mean, there was that video recently of that mouse performing CPR on another mouse. Like that is a to have like that compassion and empathy towards another individual to try and perform CPR is a whole level of intelligence above
Well,
a
I'm
lot
sure
of
you've heard
species.
the study about the rats where they had the one that was bound and there was a treat, and they would go rescue their friend before they would go after the treat, you know?
There was one was like, would they share or would they like keep it to themselves? And a lot of these animals would share. I think a lot of the rats would share, wouldn't they?
Hmm.
Yeah, they're very rats are
Generally.
cool. I've always wanted to keep rats, but this is the smell that puts me off.
Really. Rats are
Yeah.
really, really, really clean animals.
Well, I've like gone to colleges where they have like rodent rooms. Maybe they weren't very clean as rooms, but I wasn't particularly fond of the smell back then. But maybe it's just they were dirty. I don't know. Um, where was I? Where did I
Sorry.
get to? That's not your fault. We were talking before I stopped at that point anyway. So where did I stop myself?
Yeah, be careful. I can talk about rats for days.
I don't remember where I got to.
I think you stopped
You were
with the
saying about putting a test. There was a test about leopard geckos with a thing delay. Does that help any?
That's because I diverged. I think okay, so I think I'm going to start here. Russian used a decrease in speed of approach to show that sheep find the controversial practice of electro uh, immobilization, in which the sheep are stopped from struggling, were being shown by having electric current passing through them, particularly aversive. Shocking, being electrocuted is aversive. Sheep were put at one end of a corridor, which they naturally ran down to escape from people at the start end. And at the other end of the corridor, some of the sheep running were caught and physically restrained by a person, as would happen in normal shearing. Others were caught and then electrically immobilized, which makes things much easier for shearing, and others were not restrained at all. Once the sheep had experience of what was going to happen to them at the end of the corridor, they were individually put back to the start of the corridor and their running speed was measured. Sheep that experienced the full restraint with electro-immobilization moved much more slowly as the trial progressed and eventually become reluctant to approach the end of the runway. suggesting that this procedure was something they wanted to avoid. Sheep had simply been restrained without electric immunization, moved faster, but the sheep's were never caught at the end of the runway, ran fastest of all, suggesting that being restrained by a human is something sheep want to avoid if they can. However, they want to avoid being electrocuted more than anything. Kind of stating the obvious, but at least it's down on paper, I guess. Um, Choice and preference tests. These can be thought as approach or avoidance tests, but the animal is offered two or more options at the same time, and so is indicating the relative value it puts on the various options. Although choice tests can be conducted on a small scale, such as offering an animal a choice of two or more food types of food, flooring, or types of bedding material. They can be used on a greater scale to provide answers to questions such as whether farm animals should be kept outside and allowed to range freely. For example, human consumers are often critical of the increased practice of keeping dairy cows indoors and believe that cows should be able to go outside and eat grass. It is therefore a considerable public interest to know whether the cows themselves value going outside. Charlton Natal gave dairy cows a choice between indoor housing where they could obtain high energy food and going out to pasture where they could graze freely. Twice a day after milking, they took individual cows to a choice point from indoor housing and pasture and let them choose where to go. Between milkings, the cows could move between the two areas, so they had ample experience of both. When taking to the choice point, the cows are more likely to choose the pasture than the indoor stall. 66% versus 38%. But overall spent more time indoors. Although the behavior was highly dependent on the weather, the time of year, and the time of day. Choice tests have also shown that pigs and chickens are very sensitive to the smell of ammonia and choose to avoid it even in concentrations as low as 10 ppm. I was just thinking about like substrate as well, doing like choice tests for substrate or like food. Brings me back to the 3D printing, the tea mazes for doing choice tests as well, Simon. I need to get on with that, to be fair. That would be really.
Right. Tea maize with substrates. Never thought about that.
Or again, if you just gave them tubs of different substrate choices, again, time spent and then spatial distribution could also be a telling factor of whether they like
Yeah.
choose substrate or not. And one of the reasons that I moved from the pine shavings, well, I hated the pine shavings, but I did it as a test, and I moved to some other substrates because I provided a tub of that substrate, and I found the snake was often sat in it, so I put their entire enclosure as that substrate. Um, which interestingly, I found a lot of king snakes chose unnatural substrates that are like considered innate, like the cocoa, the repti block, or like aspen bedding over actual dirts and soils,
Huh.
which brings in questions about domestication, doesn't it? Conditioned place preference and aversion. Sometimes it's quite impossible to use any of the above methods to discover what an animal does or does not value because all these methods require an animal to have repeated experiences so that it can give an informed opinion of what's happened to it. Where something happens only once, such as being caught or having a one-off medical procedure, it is not possible to see whether the experience results in a change of behavior, however negative or positive the experience might have been, because there is no next time. Under these circumstances, conditioned place preferences or avoidance can be very useful as they involve training animals with a single trial to associate one place with a particular experience, such as food or loud noise, and a second place with something completely different, usually when nothing happens. The two places are made very obviously different, such as being painted with different colors or patterns to make it easy as possible for an animal to associate each place with what happens to it there. The animal's preference for it being in one place or another is measured both before and after the animal experiences uh, being investigated. If after the single experience there is a shift in what the animal chooses to spend its time, so that it starts to spend more time when it's obtained a reward. This suggests that it liked the experience and is trying to repeat it. Conversely, if it now finds the place where the stimulus appeared and starts to prefer the place where it did not experience it, then it suggests that it found the stimulus aversive and wants to get away from it. The advantage of this method is that it can work with just one experience, provided that the animal is clever enough to make the association. Instrumental conditioning. Even though methods described in the rest of it, I'm not reading all sections out, provide important information about animal preferences, with relatively little or no special equipment, and often with minimal interference with the animals themselves, demonstrating what they find rewarding or punishing using operant conditioning is still the best test of what they value having or being able to avoid. This is because approach avoidance and expression of preference can be all hardwired innate responses, such as reflexes, taxes, or kinesis done automatically and unthinkingly. Bacteria can exhibit preferences by moving up a chemical gradient, and even plants can appear to make choices by growing towards light or away from the pull of gravity. Goal directed or action outcome working for rewards, however, suggests an altogether more complex mechanism involving different brain pathways. The easiest way to distinguish a mechanism based on rewards and punishments from simpler mechanisms, such as always turning left to find food, is to make a reward contingent of the animal making a completely arbitrary response, such as pressing down on a lever or turning in a circle and seeing whether the animal will learn to do the exact opposite and push the lever upwards or circling in the opposite direction when the reward contingencies change. So if the animal can continuously update its behavior and do whatever it takes to get at that reward, then clearly there is no fixed relationship between the stimulus, e.g., the sight of food, and the response, and we have correctly identified that the animal's goal is obtaining the reward.
Do you think at some point with the T mazes for geckos or snakes, you come to the point where you see that, as it's written here, oh, the animal was not clever enough. It's just doing randomly things.
Um,
Maybe.
maybe, but I think there also needs to be enough time for them to make repeat choices to learn that they can make choices. So, for example, let me drag something out. This is like a dog puzzle. Fucking dust in my face. Sorry. There's like you slide it and get to like compartments underneath. However, a lot of people will give it to a snake the first time and just slide that over, and that's that. But the animal must learn in slow approximations first before you get them to the challenge of the end result. So what I would do, I'm going to make a video on this, is leave it open, put the pinky mouse there, let the snake come over and just eat, right? Next time, slide it over slightly across and have like a little bit of the pinky covered. Same thing, comes over, eats. Next time, a little bit more across, eats, and to the point where it's just about like a sliver open, but they can smell and see the pinky. They push their nose and push it aside and get to the pinky. And eventually you get to a point where you can cover up the pinky, and then the animal knows that they're probably going to be under things, and they'll go around moving it around and actually using the puzzle piece. But a lot of people don't realize that they need to like learn these things first, because in the wild you will see animals foraging and flicking up rocks or searching in holes, and you'll see a snake poke its head into a hole and come up, move along, poke the next one. But that animal has had so many repetitions of years of doing that day in and day out, of
Mm.
learning to like probe and search, right? So when someone will do that and the animal doesn't get it or doesn't understand that puzzle, it's because they didn't do approximations and they think, oh, animals are stupid. When in reality, you didn't give them a chance to like do it in small steps. You got to build them up to learning how to work with it, right?
You're just accelerating the learning process the way you just described it. Because
Yeah.
basically, you could just put the puzzle feeder and wait for the animal to discover that by smelling, oh, there's something below, and then you would just have, I don't know, triple of the time needed to learn.
Yeah. I mean, there might be some things that are innately much more intelligent. For example, perhaps like monitor lizards that might on day dot start ripping and searching.
Yeah.
But if that foraging and searching behavior is something that is a species typical behavior, and I'm using species typical and not natural behavior as my terminology because it's more appropriate, then they're more likely to do that on their first try, right? Or just do it innately. But if it's something like a bearded dragon's species typical behavior isn't to go foraging and flicking through things. A bearded dragon typically will sit up in a high position and be basking, looking for birds and whatnot, and then it'll see like a roach or something run across the floor and it'll jump down, gobble that food item, and then go up to like a nice position. They aren't like foragers, but actually they're actually much more um sit up and like observe and then run down and get something. And same with these sand snakes, they're incredibly fast, incredibly quick, but their um species typical behavior isn't to go around searching and probing and foraging like that. They'll sit up on a vantage point in this desert on like a pile of rocks or something and just sit. And because they're primarily all about eyesight, they'll sit and look across the dunes or the habitat. And when they see a lizard or something crossing and running, they'll go darting over it to go and catch it, because that is what the animal that the species typically does. So it's the whole thing of like as teaching a fish to or grading a fish on its ability to climb a tree, right? You've got to make it biologically relevant to the animal that you're actually doing things for. And that's a lot of context that I think a lot of reptile keepers do not realize, I think. Where did I get? Oh, I wanted a rewards punishment. Okay, I'm just going to take a drink first. Sorry, I go on tangents if you haven't noticed. I hope worthwhile tangents and I'm not just like getting in the way of it. But even if an animal will work for food, reward, tired, even if an animal will work for a reward, however, this does not complete the link to welfare. To do this, we need to know whether obtaining what is being approached, preferred, or worked for actually matters to the animal. In other words, we need to know just what an animal wants, but how much it wants it in comparison to something we know it to be important. Most obviously, food. One way of doing this is to make it more difficult for an animal to access a reward and then see what it wants that reward. See if it wants that reward so much, it will overcome the difficulties and effectively pay a higher price for every reward. It is prepared to pay an even higher price, and particularly is prepared to pay the same price as it would for food. Then we have an objective measure of what it values. The way a price is paid can be varied to suit the animal and the circumstances. To demonstrate what they value, animals have been willing to squeeze through a narrow gap, walk down a long corridor, push a weighted door, walk through a water bath, run over an electric grid, be blasted with jets of air, or simply repeated perform an operant response such as pecking a key, not just once, but many times for each reward. The maximum price an animal is prepared to pay in the face of these increasing difficulties before it gives up and refuses to pay the price can then be used as a measure of how much it values that reward. If an animal will pay as much for access to bedding material as it will pay for food, it is showing that at least in that moment that it values bedding as much as it values food. For example, dairy cows are willing to pay a considerable price for access to automated rotating brushes, which they rub against different parts of their bodies. The cows quickly learn to operate switches to make the brushes rotate, and they will push open heavy gates to gain access to the automated brushes, paying a higher price in weights as they would do to get to food when food deprived for 1/2 hours. That puts a lot of ideas going through your head, doesn't it?
I already have my example. This was what I just mentioned with the spraying of my leopard geckos.
Mm-hmm.
So if the observation of the wild that they don't like to be in open rain or they don't like to be sprayed with a water bottle or missed it in an enclosure. What sometimes I observe, because they react to it, it's a sudden touch, and then they try to hide or move a bit aside. And at least my male learned that when the water spray is coming, he's closing the eyes and is walking towards the direction where the water is coming from, because he knows that there's the nozzle, and behind the nozzle is the arm, and you can climb on the nozzle and on the arm, and then you're outside. He does that already. So he's overcoming some cost, like, oh, I have to go through water which is touching me, I don't like it, because I can get out and explore. It seems to me like that. Perhaps I'm overinterpreting, but yeah.
I actually had this in one of my recent shorts where I started talking about this in the script of my video, where I don't know, in the shorts, and I put it on the I thought I was in the video then. I was gonna say I'll put it on the screen, but in that video where I moved the light around the tank and the snake was following after the light, I moved it to the front in an exposed space. So I asked the animal to pay a price of sitting in the exposed space that innately I knew it didn't want to do for access to the reward. So I was asking it to pay a price for that resource, and it did.
Yeah.
Because it values that resource.
Yeah.
But the scale of light. Funny old world, isn't it? Right, the ultimate question: survival value, adaptation, and phylogeny, or phylogeny. Natural behavior is, as we have seen, behavior shown by wild or free-range members of a species that evolved as adaptations to the ancestral environment. Tinbergen 1 argued that questions about adaptation could only be sensibly answered by studying animals in their natural habitat, where doing or not doing the behavior could be demonstrated to make the difference between life or death. It might therefore seem irrelevant to ask this question about domestic or captive animals that may now be in environments that are very different from those in which their ancestors evolved and are largely protected from the hazards their wild ancestors faced. They have been selectively bred by humans so that many now look and behave very differently from any wild animal. However, there are two important reasons why understanding the adaptive significance of wild behavior in wild species is important to welfare. The first reason is that behavior has been critical to survival in an ancestor as a prime candidate for being valued by its descendants. So might fruitfully be one of the first things to be investigated in any research project. For example, the junkerfowl ancestors of our domestic chickens roost in trees at night to avoid predation, and this highlights the possible importance of roosting in modern breeds. The fact that wild junglefowl roost in trees does not prove that all modern chickens want to roost, but it provides a very plausible hypothesis that it might be a behavior they value. This hypothesis can then be tested. Some behavior that is necessary to survival in wild species will turn out to be of reward value to their domestic descendants. Others will not. But understanding the adaptive significance of behavior contribution is a useful way of deciding which hypothesis to test first. So that's really important because a lot of people will say natural behavior, but actually what it is your genetics. Again, going back to the early part of this paper, your genes predetermine what you find rewarding and what you find punishing. And then your behavior is the adaptive way that you achieve those goals. So as a species evolves, as selective pressures are put upon that species in that environment, it's likely that natural things provide rewards to genes that have been shaped by natural environments. But it doesn't mean that the natural thing is a thing that it values itself. Does that make sense? It just means that the natural history has shaped the genes that shape what they find rewarding and punishing. But let's say like bull pythons, the male bull pythons climb a lot. They would say they would find climbing in of itself. The gene would say they find climbing rewarding. But the behavior could be on a rolling pin, it could be on plastic piping, it could be on PVC tubing, or it could be a natural branch chopped straight off a tree. But it's the fallacy of it natural is better that we assume that because the tree branch is natural, that it's better than the rolling pin or the PVC tube, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, and you could even go more far and ask if some of the behavior that was naturally giving an advantage to the animal or to that species, and where to the individual something is considered of value, is now in the environment we have the animal in absolutely not beneficial. Think about us
Yeah.
humans. It's like you have a human that is made for running and walking and gathering things and running away and hunting something, and getting highly caloric food is of great value for you because you never know when you're getting it again. So you try to get a lot of it the moment you have it. This is just what Melanie just mentioned. Like you don't have the concept of when it will appear again, so you just consume it.
Mhm.
Now we have the problem. Highly caloric food is of a high value for you, but it's not beneficial because McDonald's is next door and you behave every day like McDonald's is a next door, it might disappear. You consume it and consume it because it's of a high value for you. But it's no longer beneficial because you have other effects. So, and I mean, this is like with dogs which are overfed or geckos which are overfed, and I don't know if this is even with the behavior when I look at my animals. Like, if I would constantly let the male meet the females, he would overbreed them.
Mhm.
In the wild, it is beneficial. You see the female, you breed it, you give your genes further. The female says, "Oh, a male, I crossed it. Let's combine the genes." And now it would be not beneficial because you would overbreed the female, and the male would exhaust itself. I don't know, just hypothesizing, but yeah. So what is of value to every animal we domesticate might not be beneficial. I think this is an important aspect we should
Yeah,
have learned
exactly.
in the last 10,000 years, I guess.
It's just that natural things are just we can assume are likely to contribute to giving the animal what it wants, but it isn't a fact that it has to be natural for the animal to achieve something that they find rewarding. So there's a zoo local to me that has this obsession with we're a serious zoo, right? So they won't give any toys that are like colorful. I don't understand why the color even matters, but they won't give any sort of artificial things. Everything has to be natural because it's a serious zoo, right?
Mm.
Whereas my position is that's stupid because a serious zoo would know all of this and be looking to give the animals what they want to get them into a positive effective state as a majority of their time, because that's about good animal welfare. So the rotary brushes and things like that, why are we not seeing like zebra be giving rotary brushes and things like that? Or for example, there's a crocodile zoo in the UK that don't have any toys or anything like that in the enclosures. They just the crocodiles are expected to just sit there, right? You can bask
Mm.
or you can get in the water. But we know that you can get those like kettlebell shaped things that crocodilians love to thrash around and beat up and stuff. We know that from looking at Snake Discovery's alligator and how it beats up all its toys and stuff. And you can tell that that animal repeats that behavior, repeats that interaction. You could look at latency to getting to that item, but just by looking at it, you know just by like all of this being subconscious that the animal likes that item, right? And why does that zoo not give anything to its crocodiles? I s- I would like to see in a lot more zoos giving these novel items that they've found out the animals desire and are willing to work for. But
Mm.
there's this whole like it has to be natural, and that this whole like natural fallacy gets in the way of better welfare for animals, and it grinds my gears. But that's another one. So that's why I don't know if you've looked, but a lot of my enclosures have gradually gotten like less obsessed with bioactive, less obsessed with natural, and I've just been toying around with what the snakes want. And I've been doing that since the paper came out in 23. So there'll be some people that will be like, I prefer my enclosures natural. I don't like your enclosures. I'm like, that's nice. My enclosure is conforming to what the animal's telling me it wants. You don't
Mm.
matter. No. And Melanie, like your enclosure can look however it looks. You just have to be thinking about what the bearded dragon wants.
Yes, I have what I call my industrial look for my cage for my bearded dragon, but he's happy. He has everything that he needs, and if there's something that I see that would make it better, then I don't mind adding it. But one of the things with the natural versus not natural is also how much of the stuff will you not find out in the woods, but is more practical. I mean, it's like the people who are like, well, I don't want to wear or do anything unnatural. Okay, shoes, glasses. You're not going to find those out in nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for context, Simon, Melanie's enclosure for her bearded dragon has like these like wooden shelves that come out from the back to around halfway, and it's like a shelf gap, like basically it's a reach stack all the way down. So the back half of the enclosure from like halfway up down is this reach stack of different cubbies or these wooden shelves with a basking spot on top, and her dragon can get in each cubby going down. And what that is and actually called is a reach stack, Melanie, because there's a guy called Frank Reitz that did something similar for his monitor lizards, and they would bask at the top of the lamp, or if they want to go down, they would go down. And there's also in this snake tank, the sand snakes, I piled up cork tubes on top of each other in this like log pile so they could bask on top and then go down the different levels. So what you've done is exactly what I chose to do to give choice to my animals. So I see no problem with your Beta Dragon's reach stack. I think it's actually quite clever. Is it effective use of space?
And actually, hubby took and came up with it because it's how it divides it gives him more space.
Yeah, you're using up space that would be empty air because a lot of people would have it on
Yeah.
the floor and like a branch here and there, but you're just using it three-dimensionally. I think it's cool. Does your does he go into like the middle compartments, stuff like that as well? The
He
dragon
has
itself.
before a little bit, but he doesn't usually. But I also think that as he gets older, he'll probably explore more of it.
That's fair. That's cool. This topic excites me. The whole welfare science is really my thing, if you can't tell. I love this stuff. Where did I get to? I distracted us all again. Um, where did I get to? Someone help me.
I don't know. First reason, second reason. Have you been there?
I
Jungle
think
fowl.
I
Oh, no,
think I
jungle fowl
think
we
it's
did.
second reason.
Jungle fowl we did. Yeah.
The second reason why the adaptive significance of behavior in wild ancestors is important for farm animal welfare is that there's often helps us to understand why their descendants living in a completely different man-made environment can sometimes behave in ways that are positively harmful to themselves. Some people see the fact that animals do not always choose what is good for their health in the long run as a serious objection to using what animals value as a welfare metric. Animals may eat things that are poisonous to them, for example, or eat too much and become life-threateningly obese. This is because they still value the rewards that their ancestors valued in their current domestic environment. These rewards no longer align with what is best for their health. Wild carnivores, such as the ancestors of our dogs, often have to chase many prey unsuccessfully before finally securing anything to eat. Even when they have brought prey down, they may face competition for it from conspecifics, and that's like other pack mates, or other scavenging species. So a tendency to eat quickly whenever food becomes available is key to survival. Transferring this wolfing of food to a domestic environment can easily lead to overeating. The lesson here is to use what animal value in the here and now as an important part of their welfare, but to realize that it's not the only measure of welfare that is important. It must be considered alongside physical health of animals. Like humans, do not always make the choice which is best for them in the long run. Animal welfare involves a balance between what is best for the long-term health and what is valued in the current moment, just as it does with us humans. So, for example, I always say don't give fruit to your bearded dragon, right? Because for beginners, it's like if you say they can have a bit of fruit, a lot of people take that and they start feeding fruit like every week or every other day, right? They go nuts with them. And I just say just don't feed fruit because that saying don't feed fruit to a lot of beginners saves a lot of heartache and welfare problems for those individual animals. But me knowing all of this, sometimes I'm like a little bit of fruit or something can be could it like instigate a lot of positive effective states in that dragon, but you have to balance it alongside what's best for the animal long term. Because I could give it a lots of strawberries, for example, and my dragon loves it, but it could cause gastric upset with all the like microbiome and the dentition can rot away. So you have to
Mm.
think like that. But in that moment, the animal welfare is top tier because that animal is in such a positive state, right? So this is all a balancing act, but this takes skill and it takes knowledge and it takes experience to make decisions about everything all at once, right? And
The same
beginners don't have that yet, so that's why I make that decision.
yeah, it's the same as with dusting insects. I saw that the animals react to the same feeder item different when it's not dusted. So every 2 to 3 months, I putting in locusts which are not dusted, and it's a novel item because it's a different feeder animal basically, taste
You know,
wise.
funny enough, Techite actually does not like roaches if they are not dusted with calcium.
So he prefers it with calcium.
Yeah, he prefers this with calcium. He wouldn't even eat them until I started dusting with calcium. And then he was like, oh, more crickets, but weird crickets. But then he started eating them and now he's used to them. So now
Mm.
he'll have them if they're dusted, but he wants them dusted. He doesn't like them when they're not. Also, I
It,
did put pictures of the enclosure in your Discord and your enclosure submissions. So, Simon, if you want to go look, you can.
yeah, I do. Thanks. It's like I just remembered the cricket issue because I recently bought again after a year crickets because I know that usually my geckos, after tasting one, they despise every other cricket coming behind. And it seems like crickets, when they're dusted, are preferable to crickets which are not dusted. Might be smell. I hate them too, by the way.
Crickets are still Kai favorite bug. So I am very, very used to crickets by now.
Mine don't.
Also, Technight's not in any of the pictures I just took because he's currently in his sling sleeping.
There's something that I do that I don't tell people to do is like sometimes I will buy I will have like a tub of locusts, and I will feed them, and then I'll just literally release the entire tub of locusts into the enclosure and let her go nuts and eat like a whole tub of locusts in one go with no dusting whatsoever. Because I know that the diet I've been feeding her all week is like incredibly high in calcium. I've been feeding her
Yeah.
like dandelions. I know the weeds are really, really high. So you can actually, if you did the maths and you work out the calcium content of each bowl of food, you can know for that week the calcium content they have consumed and know that you can knock dust the bugs, knowing that the amount of calcium that's gone into that bitter dragon's mouth is higher than the amount of phosphorus that's gone in the bugs. So I'm doing all this stuff. You can't say it to beginners. You
Yeah.
I say it's irresponsible to try and give this like advanced stuff and let them get confused. Where did I get again?
So
um,
I'm new at doing all this. I do as simple as I can, so I don't mess up if I can help
yeah,
it.
that's the way to be, and then you slowly find your own way. It's here we can take a lesson from Tim Bergen's careful separation of the four different questions about animal behavior. He was very clear that questions about adaptation needed quite different answers from those about causation, and that confusing the two sorts of question could lead to error. His own work on eggshell removal and black-headed gulls showed that adaptive significance of the birds removing empty shells from the nest soon after the chicks had hatched was protection against predators. But he was quite clear that this finding showed nothing in itself about causal mechanisms that made the gulls remove the eggs. Although the behavior was an anti-predator adaptation, it was not stimulated by the arrival of a predator as the action had been taken preemptively. The stimuli eliciting the behavior and adaptive effect were quite separate, although in the gulls' wild environment, the two worked harmoniously together. This is the way natural selection works, favoring a mechanism that increases fitness in a given environment. The change the environment and the harmony can be broken and the animal behaves maladaptively. Phylogeny. I'm trying to open this window because I'm getting really hot all of a sudden. 1 second. Right, here we go. I can breathe. Right. Tim Bergen's first question about the phylogeny of behavior is perhaps the least researched question in the context of natural behavior and welfare, but it deserves more attention than it is generally given. Tim Bergen himself was concerned about how behavior changed over time at a species level. For example, a courtship display in a descendant species may be an exaggerated version of a display in an ancestral species. Most of our domestic and farm animals are still the same species as their wild ancestors. Jungle fowl and chickens can still interbreed, as can pigs and wild boar. But nevertheless, there have been major changes in body shape, behavior, and other traits as shown by the major different breeds of chicken, horses, cows, and other domestic animals that have been produced by artificial selection. This constitutes another problem with using natural behavior of wild animals as the yardstick for welfare. Namely that in the course of time, breeding by humans to suit human needs has often changed the behavior and physiology of our farm animals to such an extent that their needs and values are now entirely different from those of their wild ancestors. The farm animals we have now are the complex result of recent artificial selection combined with an ancient legacy from past natural selection. They are neither completely ancient nor completely new. For this reason, we need research to understand their needs as they are now, genetically changed, reared in a domestic environment, the result of both natural and artificial selection. I'm going to highlight this bit of text before I go on my next tangent, so I know. This is why I'm thinking about domestication. If you work with lines of snakes, and my focus of different lines, I could breed snakes to have a preference for bedding.
Mhm.
So you could also breed them to have a preference for the bedding that is most amenable to captivity. For example, aspen's a really easy one. I think there's a lot of individual snakes that prefer, if you did tests, would prefer aspen, whether that's because they've been bred for many generations and it's the keeper's preference for aspen that they've bred the line to be without knowing that they're doing it, or you have an individual that does prefer it, and you start breeding that preference from that animal into a line that prefers it. But you can breed animals with a focus of domestication so that they would actually make the choice for the thing that you want to use them for and the substrates and everything, and it be the thing that they prefer so that they naturally enjoy captivity more and enjoy their lives in under human care as pets more. And that, I think, should be our ultimate goal in herpetoculture. If herpetoculture is about culturing more reptiles, I think the goal should be domestication to ultimately have the try and result with the best animal welfare possible. This is why my focus now is like all the hybrids and stuff, because I see that all of this is a holistic focus towards ultimately better pets for us and better welfare for the animals. That's my whole shtick right now.
Your perfect example for that is pugs. Because they bred the pugs for a certain look, but it's actually not as good for their health and welfare to the point where they're now starting to breed out of the pug nose for the dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, so that the pugs were originally bred to have like baby faces to be lap dogs for women that like they found the baby faces cute back in the day. Um, but just like how they bred different breeds of dog to be like working dogs and have this really high energy and be really like energetic, and then lap dogs to have like really low energy requirements. Sometimes you have a corn snake that you hold it and it's flailing around and it's hectic, and sometimes you have a snake that just sits there and it's really, really calm and it's happy to just like move around and tongue flick and have a look around whilst just sitting comfortably in your hand. You could probably sit and watch TV with it, right? Which is a lot of what pet keepers want. So you could have lines that are energetic like that are really good display animals in a terraria. They're moving around, enjoying their environment, and you can have more relaxed lines that are really good at just being like sit with you and watch TV vibe. So even though they're not like working animals in the same way of like the dogs definitely had jobs, these lions could have different roles as pets as well. So my brain's going in this direction. Like I think there's a lot of people that are like no, because I want to be wild and I want to be exotic, and they hear me talking about this and they see it as like some sort of like blasphemy, but I just see it as like where we're going to be in 50 years' time, 100 years' time. That's the future, in my opinion. And when the whole thing of like positive lists and they're going to ban certain species and you can only have a list of what you can keep, if you're working towards domestication and you end up having domestic breeds of things that are suitable, you're moving beyond that into a thing that's like not going to be taken away from you, I don't think. Especially if you're using the species that are very, very likely to be on these lists anyway. It's a whole thing. I could go on for literally hours about my thoughts about domestication of reptiles, and I think it should be our entire focus, but there you go. Artificial selection by humans has much in common with natural selection in the wild, but there are also important differences. One of the most important of these is that humans often select for single traits and then find this leads to unforeseen problems. For example, selection for young, high growth rate in broiler chickens has led to skeletal and other problems, including obesity in the adult bird that are used for breeding, so that they have to be feed restricted, which in itself is another welfare issue. Natural selection, on the other hand, is multi-trait. Every change, such as an increase in growth rates, has to result in a net overall improvement in survival and reproduction, so that a bird that grew faster could not walk and or reproduce would be selected against. In nature, only faster growing individuals that could walk and produce offspring would contribute genetically to the next generation. Whereas in domesticated environments, individuals that would not survive in the wild and could not be kept alive and be bred from. Humans have selectively bred for animals with traits that humans prefer, such as fast growth rate, milk yield, docility, usually with little heed or knowledge of other traits that may have been selected either by as a byproduct or as the underlying mechanism. For example, selecting chickens and pigs for fast growth rate has involved changes to their anatomy and their metabolism, affecting how much they eat, how hungry they become, how well they can deal with heat stress, and many other aspects of their bodies and behavior that we're only just beginning to understand. Artificial selection has affected gene expression, brain structure, and hormone balance, and countless other traits. Understanding what we have done, the phylogeny of domestication, is an important contribution to welfare.
That also just reminded me about the rant I had earlier about silkies.
Yeah, I mean, I think as breeders, you have to like be culling. You have to be like either I call it a hard cull or a soft cull. Soft cull is just you're selling that animal, you're getting out of your collection, out of your line, so it's not in your breeding population. And hard cull is killing it. I think realistically, if you want to be responsible, what we have done for so many thousands of years is you need to kill things that you do not want to go on to produce horrific welfare problems for the whole population. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. So, for example, when it starts talking about like a single trait with unforeseen circumstances, I was having a conversation in my garage with a local raptor shop owner about the when he was holding the hybrid and he was enamored by it. We're talking about like I was like, we can breed for docility and for handling and stuff, but if they become so docile that they have a really crappy feed response because there's their lack of aggression in the feed response or just a lack of oomph to go and get the food in general, then you've gone too far the other way, and causing
Mm.
like horrific feeders. So you need to have this multi-gene approach to selecting for good feeders while selecting for good for handling. So it's this all-encompassing thing that should take, if you're being a serious breeder, should take you like 15 years to get to your, well, there is no end goal. You're constantly perfecting and changing and nurturing your lines to the point where you have like domestication at the end of your lifespan as a keeper. You should be able to get something at the end and hand something off to people that you've got a domestic breed at that point.
And I think too much also breeders are focused on making these really, really cool looking reptiles with these really, really cool patterns, which are cool. Don't get me wrong. I love to see them. They're beautiful. But unfortunately, sometimes those cause problems too, you know?
Yeah, I mean that I think is also a massive part of domestication is making beautiful animals that we want. But you need to be selecting a multi-selection approach to that and not just the color itself. Because
Yeah.
people have like a colorful animal, but the rest of it is like something that someone else might even kill because they see it as a cull. It might be a horrific
Mhm.
breeder, might produce like horrifically kinked babies. It might just be like snappy and bitey, an awful pet, but it's pretty, so it's okay.
Yeah.
When actually the colors are the easiest thing to bring in and change after the fact. The behavior is the hardest thing. So honestly, I could go on for ages, but conclusion, the current emphasis by many in the food industry on natural behavior as a key requirement for good welfare does not ensure that the farm animal welfare in practice is improved. Some natural behavior is associated with good welfare, but some is not. The growth of animal behavior studies over oh goodness, excuse me, the last 60 years has shown that different natural behaviors has different causes, different developmental pathways, different health outcomes, and consequently different implications for welfare. In particular, natural behavior, if taken on its own, lacks an essential piece of evidence about welfare, namely whether it is valued by the animals themselves. That is such a good sentence. It is this information that is needed to justify claims for improved welfare. There are now many different methods available for discovering what animals value, ranging from simple observation of what they approach or avoid to showing what they will work to obtain what they want. Some of the relevant information is already available in the scientific literature, while some will need further research to answer specific questions about the role of individual behaviors in each species, differences in welfare requirements, difference between breeds, sexes, and individuals of different ages within one species will also be needed to take into account. Also, I would add lines. Lines is the most important thing out of all because it doesn't matter whether it's a species, a hybrid, a breed. The only thing that matters is that genetic lineage of and the genetic lineage of the behavior, the genes, all of it is all about that line. So the most important thing out of everything is lines. In fact, you could say it's the only thing that matters, actually. The only thing that matters is lines. Collaboration between academia and commercial companies will be essential as even when it is established what animals value. It will still be necessary to find ways of providing it for them that work and practice on a large scale. Changes that are difficult for busy farm staff to handle or clean, or that make an operation uncommercial will not in the end improve the welfare of animals. Tim Bergen's Four Questions, published 60 years ago, still provides the best framework for studying animal behavior, given a consistent reminder of the complexity and diversity of behavior and of the many different factors we need to know about before we can, with confidence, claim to have understood the consequences of animals showing or failing to show a particular behavior. This framework shows us important of understanding what the animal behavior of a species is, but also providing a warning that much it may have changed through selective breeding, and that what is natural may or may not be valued by our present day domestic farm animals. And I would also say it doesn't necessarily mean that even if it's like a wild animal, that it's the most important thing, because it could be something completely novel and unnatural. For example, you see tortoises will rub their shells and stuff on like brush heads. So the genes are saying that the tortoise will find that rewarding, but the behavior in relation to rubbing on a brush head is entirely unnatural and novel, yet it really values that item. Same with the rotary brushes for cows and stuff. So, boom, love this paper. It is such a like mind-opening paper, and
Did
no
it
one
have
wrote
did it have feedback? I mean, you said it's how old is it? 2 years? 3 years?
2 years, yeah.
What was the feedback or the discussion caused? Did it cause anything? Has there been follow-ups or criticism or
I've not seen anything, but even in like a lot of organizations that talk about teaching welfare to zoos, like Wild Welfare is a really good organization. Um, can you? I don't know if I'm sharing the tab or my entire browser, but
browser?
you can see me typing.
Yep.
There's a company called Wild Welfare that its whole thing is teaching welfare science to zoo staff, because there's a lot of zookeepers that have a Scooby, let's be honest. But um, if I go to animal welfare concepts, it is brilliant. Apart from, I fundamentally disagree with the insistence of natural behaviors. It will say natural behaviors throughout all of this, when I think it should say species typical behaviors or motivated behaviors, because that is really what is correct in my opinion. But like it constantly goes on about natural behavior, and I'm like, I fundamentally disagree. But apart from that, um, really good resource. But the zoo world, I see over and over and over again, natural, 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 and like I just think of this, and I'm like, but I think this paper is ahead of its time. I really think this paper is ahead of its time. No one's read it, and I think typically a lot of exotic brained keepers or zookeepers see farm animal and they go yawn next and move away from it. But this is a fundamentally mind shifting paper that many people just they have to read it. It's just it changes your entire way of thinking about animals. Actually, what I might do is for the first time ever, if you guys are comfortable with this, I might put this journal club recording on YouTube because I think this paper is that important, and also it's a good advertisement for people to come and join journal club. So if you guys are comfortable with it, I will actually turn this into a YouTube video.
Yeah, sure,
Fine
let's
with
do
me.
that. Perhaps there's more. For me, it's fine.
What was that, Melanie?
Oh, I think I'm fine with it. Go ahead.
Sweet, I'll do that then. I don't know why I'm in the dark now. All my stuff's turned off. But thoughts on the paper. Whilst you're doing that, I'm gonna go turn the light back on.
I like it because I don't think about it often enough. And I think a lot of people need to take more giving their pets an opportunity to let them know what they want.
Yeah.
Like I've said before, I try to be really big on autonomy on what he wants to do. If he wants to be out, does he want to be in?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does he want? And try to give him the freedom to be able to, let me know what he wants.
To make
Because he
choices.
is his own person. He might not be a human. He might not be able to have the high concept that we do, but he has
He's an
his own
individual.
personality and his own wants and needs. And
The other thing that I think it brings up in my mind is how everyone in the reptile world is so at each other's throats and are very quick to point out that other people are doing things differently from them or they're doing things wrong. When I think everyone's care should be catered and in tune with the wants and desires of the individuals within their care. And the wants and desires, especially of individual animals and animals of different lines, will differ between different keepers. So someone that like jumps down someone's throat about how they're doing something might be perfect, perfect care for the individual that they actually have. And it would be totally inappropriate to do it the way they're insisting that they do it for that animal when their care was already geared towards that animal.
mm-hmm,
So, with an understanding of this, I think that a lot of keepers should calm down and be a bit more slower and be a bit more pragmatic about how they approach the whole topic.
Perhaps you could take the opportunity of that paper and just go through the structure of that paper and adapt it a bit more to her permaculture and specific aspects like what you just mentioned. You know, just comment on basically you would just comment on the specific paragraphs and take the thought a bit further.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
yes.
I'm going to show you something. I did, just no one watched it.
Oh,
A year ago, I made this video.
In my defense, I was not following you a year ago.
Yeah. But
but really, the thumbnail doesn't ring a bell.
yes, it was made in September 2023. I remember.
Weird. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but I really doesn't ring a bell at all.
But there you
Weird.
go. It's such an important topic. Well, maybe I failed in my job to actually make it sexy enough to get. Because what I do, you got to make it sexy to get people to look at these concepts. Because once someone goes down the rabbit hole, I think a lot of people would find this topic fascinating. But on the box, it's not a sexy topic, right? So it's one of those things. Hey, if you enjoyed that, definitely go down below, join us through Patreon, join the right tier to get access to Journal Club, and I'll see you next month in person. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.